Okay, so
Your experience. If you want
my
to
name
pull
is
yourself into the shade at
Yossi.
any point, you can do that.
I'm sorry.
No, if you want to pull yourself into the shade at some point, you're welcome
Oh,
to
yeah,
do
you
that.
can
I
switch
don't know
seats
where
if you
there
want.
is shade.
Here, there's
Yeah,
shade.
Natalie, just come
So
to the
maybe you
rear.
want to
Yeah,
move
I'll
there?
move.
Okay.
Yes.
Just and then you can sit in Natalie's chair
Yeah.
there.
Here?
This is better. She
Sit,
did that one.
sit in Natalie's chair over there.
That is
Where
better.
should I go?
Just why don't you switch with Natalie? She's in the shade over there, and
Okay.
her face can use some sun. All right, there we go.
Okay, so my name is Joe Egozi or Yossi Egozi, and I was born just into the War of Independence of Israel in 1948, and I joined the Israeli Defense Army in 1966, just few months before the 6 Days War. And immediately after my basic training, like 2-3 months after that, we were into the 6 Days War. And it was a very swift war. In few days, we got all the Sinai Peninsula and the Golan Heights and the West Bank, and we settled along the Suez Canal line. And there was a quiet time for a few months, but then started the war of attrition, where the Egyptians really couldn't stand us sitting there on the other side of the Suez Canal with our tanks and all the presence there. And it was a war that lasted for more than 2 years, where daily shelling and bombing and airplane attacks and commando commissions and stuff like that. It was very tough. It took a long time, and we lost a lot of people. And it ended sometimes in 1970. I was already out of the army. I finished my service. And then came Yom Kippur War in 73, just short while after that. In the meantime, I got married in 1970, and but before we talk about Yom Kippur War, I want to tell you something. There is nothing glorious about war. The British philosopher Bertrand Russell said, war does not determine who is right, only who is left. I've seen a lot of my friends and a lot of my relatives died in wars. And we should do anything we can to prevent wars. And what happened before the 73 war, we had the chance to prevent the war, and we didn't take it. President Sadat of Egypt was trying to talk to the Israeli government several times about, let's settle this dispute, give us our land back, and we'll live in peace. But they didn't believe him. And it escalated and escalated. And Sadat was a very wise man and very brave man. And he said to himself, either we're going to do it peacefully or we're going to do it by war. If I will have no other means, we'll go to war. And he prepared himself for the war very, very well. They trained their thousands and thousands of soldiers how to cross the canal, how to capture all the Israeli spots there, and when he decided that this is the time, on October in 1973, they started the war. It was Yom Kippur, as you know. Most Israelis are in Bet Knesset or at home. The majority of the Israeli army are based on on reserve, not on enlisted people. The line across the canal was almost deserted, very, very few people. And they started the war at 2 p.m. More than 100,000 infantries and thousands of tanks and artillery and airplane attacks. And it was a complete surprise. I was at home, and about 3 p.m. in the afternoon, all of a sudden, a jeep is stopping by my house. I lived in the desert in the south of Israel, like 3 hours from the base where my tank was. And they said, you have to come with us. And I said, what happened? He said, the Egyptians are crossing the canal. I don't know why I'm getting so emotional 48 years after. In any case, we were not prepared for the war. When we came to the base, my tank has its engine outside, beside, for maintenance. There was no ammunition, there was no machine guns, no radio system, nothing. The tank was naked. It took us about 24 hours to get ready to go, and then there were no tank transporters to take us. Normally a tank goes on a transporter and being delivered wherever it needs to go. We had to go on tracks. I drove for 18 hours going from my base towards the Suez Canal, and I don't remember when I just fainted out from being so exhausted. It's very, very hard to drive a tank, especially on a road where it's so narrow and you need not to go out of it, and at night, and I found myself sleeping under the gun in the turret, and the guy who is loading the gun took my place and continued to drive. And finally we got there, and for 1 week there were all kind of skirmishes, nothing very spectacular. But our plan was to cross the canal, and for that we had a special bridge made of very big metal like containers, but round. I don't know how to say it exactly in English, but
Cylinders, yeah.
and it was built to be pushed by tanks because it's rolling on itself into the canal and then float to the other side, and then tanks can go over it. Now the Egyptians knew that this is what we were going to do, and they directed all their efforts to stop that from happening. And this was the 5 days, the most horrible days of the war, where we had thousands of tanks fighting you. At night you don't even know who you're shooting at, who is shooting at you. My division was completely destroyed, almost completely. We had only, out of 100 tanks, only 3 tanks came back the way they left. I was one of them, luckily. So this is known as the Abirei Lev in Hebrew, Abirei Lev operation, or we call it the Battle of the Chinese Farm, because the Chinese Farm was an area of agricultural tests that basically the Japanese sent into Egypt to help them to grow vegetables and fruits in the desert, but nobody knows the difference between Chinese and Japanese letters, so everybody calls it the Chinese Farm. And in one point of that 5 days, the Egyptians sent a huge division of T-62, which is the most heaviest and advanced tank that the Russians knew how to make, and they were going north into the area where we were ready to cross in order to try and push us back. And we were 4 tanks left of my platoon, that we were ordered to go and face them and try to stop them. So 4 tanks are trying to stop 100 tanks. And normally when you fight with tanks, you're looking for area where you can climb slowly and until you can see what's going on without exposing yourself. And then you shoot and you go back. And then you look for another place to go out and shoot, so you will not be shotted back to you. In this case, it was a plateau. There was nowhere to hide. We were just standing there like in a fire range and shooting. So we waited until they will come close enough. I don't know why they didn't see us. I think that the Egyptian tanks are fighting differently than the Israeli tanks because we used to have the commander with his half body out of the turret, looking around, see what's going on, and be in much more control over the situation. The Egyptians used to close and be inside and only look through their periscopes and stuff. So I think they were much less efficient than we were. So we were waiting for them, and when they got to the good range of, so you can really hit them hard and not just wasting ammunition, we started to shoot. And it took about 1 hour, and I think we destroyed maybe 50 or 60 of the 100 tanks. Nobody of us got hit.
With only 4?
I'm sorry?
With only 4 tanks?
We were only 4 tanks. Everybody else was busy with something else. And many tanks got destroyed before that. So, but they stopped, turned around and left. Whatever left from them, like 40 tanks, they just ran away. And basically, if we were not there to stop them, the whole war would be completely different. So finally, we were able to put the bridge on and cross, and we got into the scene between the first armia and the second armia, and then split over and get around them and make them surrender. And by crossing this bridge, we basically won the war. And there were a lot of political wars before we were able to do that, because if you heard about General Ariel Sharon, he was in charge of this area, but they didn't want to let him from Tel Aviv to cross the canal. They said, this is suicide, you cannot do it. And he said, yes, I can do it. And if we do not do it, we will lose the war. And there was a lot of, and finally he just did it against orders. And that's what ended the war. He was one of the best strategists Israel ever had. I fought under him in 6 Days War also, so I know of him a little bit. So then the war ended, and after 5 years, Sadat came to Jerusalem to sign a peace agreement. And since then, we have peace with Egypt. And all this could be avoided. So that's my take so far. If you have any questions?
Why was Egypt so set on, obviously the Yom Kippur War, they wanted some of their territory back, they wanted their maybe pride back, I suppose.
Absolutely.
But what do you think started the 6 Day?
The what?
What do you think started the 6 Day War prior to that?
Oh,
Why was Egypt?
Look, we were in war, whether active or not active, with Egypt forever, from the time Israel started. In Independence War, they got very close to Tel Aviv. We were in war with them all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And in 6 Days War, they had, the president was Jamal Abdel Nasser. And he had the idea that Egypt is the biggest Arab country, the strongest, and they should control the whole Middle East. And Israel was just like a thorn in their eye. Yeah. And he started to basically believe that he can do it. And he was encouraging himself and building ideas about conquering Israel. and he started to build army. And then there was a line that the United Nations, was keeping, like between Israel and Egypt, and they chased them away. And then they closed the straits that going to the Red Sea. They were looking for war. He was sure that he will finish Israel, and he had a huge surprise. In 6 days, we got him all the way back to the Suez Canal. We took all the Sinai Desert, they have a lot of oil refineries and stuff on that side of the canal, of the east side. And so he was dreaming of winning, but it didn't happen.
So he had bigger goals, you think, than just Israel?
Is
He-
what
you think he had bigger goals than just Israel, like the
I
whole
believe
Middle East?
so. Yeah, he wanted to control the whole Middle East. Well, the Syrians has the same idea. Jordanians and Lebanese are not as ambitious, but Syria and Egypt are very ambitious about. They think the Middle East should be big Syria, and the Egyptians used to think that Middle East should be big Egypt. Egypt today is not as militant as they were. They got their lesson. They understand that by war, that nothing will be achieved, and they are in bad economical shape. All the resources went to this unfruitful war, and I think they got the lesson. And they have a very, very smart president right now. Assisi is a very smart guy, and he is having great relationship with Israel. He understands that it's much better for him to have Israel as a friend and not as an enemy.
Natalie, you had a question?
Oh, yeah, I did. I know there were over 2,000 people that died. How many people survived?
Of how many? I'm
Um,
sorry.
I think there were like 2,500 people that died.
Yeah, I'm close to 3,000. 2,800 some died.
And how many didn't die?
Well,
The rest.
we had
What
the
was
whole
the rest of
Israeli
the
army,
rest?
all the rest of them. But we had also dozens of thousands of wounded people that became invalids, losing arms and legs and sight and hearing, and even more people that are carrying the trauma of the war with them all their lives. Even if they were not injured physically, they were deeply injured mentally, and they have what they call post-trauma. Many of them, to different degrees. Some of them really cannot function. Some of them just have something to fight with. People are waking at night, sweating and screaming. It's not easy.
And you said you were born in 1946?
48.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
I
I
was
think-
born into the conflict. I'm sorry?
Yeah, you've said it early on. I think sometimes we see war, right? Like as a history person, it's always sort of especially in American history, it's sort of a constant. And Israel's much the same as far as the nation is concerned. But that we view these things as victories, but there's so much that goes unseen that we don't understand as people who weren't part of a war, of a battle, of seeing those, I guess for lack of a better term, horrors of war that go along with it,
Right.
losing your friends, losing your brothers, So,
Right.
well, Dav, you've probably heard some of these stories before. So.
Yeah, I have.
Anybody else?
Nadai was able to talk to the general who was under which I was fighting, General Amnon Reshef,
Yeah, I have the
And,
podcast.
and he had to do program that was broadcast on NPR. They had a competition, something, and when he asked me about talking on this, I said, well, I will talk, and I will also bring the general I was fighting under, because we became very good friends after the war.
Yeah.
I'm just an enlisted guy, and he's the general. But after the war, we became good friends,
Yeah.
and and he answered Nadav's questions on this program.
Yeah. Anybody else got a question? Um, so I find it your humble attitude to be fantastic. That you just called yourself just an enlisted man, when like you just described 4 tanks facing off against 100 probably better built tanks at the time. Um, like you and those other men in those tanks literally saved Israel likely, right? So
Yeah, this was a very important point. I want to tell you that, remember I told you before that I was driving until I couldn't drive anymore and the loader took my place?
Mhm.
When we did this, the loader got exhausted from putting shells. It's like
yeah,
60-pound shell
Heavy,
every
yeah.
time you need to throw into the gun and then take the shell and put it aside. He got almost, so he took my place and I replaced him at that time. I was starting to load until we finished all the ammunition, and then came something from the back. We got new supplies of ammunition, and at that time the Egyptians were shelling us. And under shelling, we had to replenish ammunition into the tank and then continue.
Mhm.
It was a very long battle and very intense. You're not used to do that. We never shoot shells one after the other like a machine gun.
Yeah.
You don't have enough to do that. But in this case, there was no other choice. And
Not normally that many targets, probably.
yeah, you need to look for targets. And here we sit here like in a range, and we just shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot. It was unbelievable, unbelievable.
Jacob, you got questions?
No.
Jacob is our constant war hawk in this group. Why can't we just
Nukem.
Nuke
nuke
'em,
'em?
yeah.
Why can't we just?
No.
Yeah, you.
So,
Yeah.
hopefully, Jacob, you take something from this this talk, that war is not always the best way to go about
It's the worst
solving
way.
our problems.
It's the worst way.
When and how did you get the bayonet?
Well, this is just very trivial. In 6 Days War, we were stopped somewhere. The Egyptians were running away. They lost all their supply lines, and they were going around in circles, hungry and thirsty and confused. And one of them just came to me, and was not even a combatant. He was on whatever job, and he said, "Water, water, I'm thirsty." So I took his gun, I gave him water, and I told him where to go, where they gathered all the POWs of the Jew. And I kept this as a memory. That's all, nothing heroic about it. Just nice to have, but I didn't have to fight my life to get it.
Yeah.
Yeah. In
That's a-
6 Day War, they were poor. I really felt so bad for them.
Yeah.
They were not an organized army at all at that time. They took their shoes off and ran away. It's unbelievable. We saw bundles of shoes after the war. It was funny. Nasser was not a responsible person. Sadat was very methodical. He knew exactly what he's going to do, and he did it in the perfect way. We also had a lot of luck in this war, because after the initial invasion, they got into Israel, into the Sinai Desert, about 5-6 miles, and there was anything to stop them. And they thought there is a trap here. They stopped, and they waited to see what's going on, and this gave us enough time to get to them. And they continued to go. They could have crossed the desert in a few hours and meet us in Israel. It was very, very big luck. They didn't know that it's going to be so easy for them to cross the canal and then continue. It was too easy. They were suspicious. What's going on here?
Hmm.
And the same happened with the Syrian on the Golan Heights. They crossed the whole Golan Heights that we kept from '67 and stopped because they felt like there is a trap here, which also gave us time to get back with them.
Yeah.
So we also need luck, a lot of luck in war.
For sure. Addie, Sarah, you guys have
Um,
any questions?
have you been to Golan Heights since?
Oh yes, many times. They were sitting on the Golan Heights, and Israel was just below, and they were shelling our kibbutzim and moshavim and cities all the time. So it was a big thing to get it from them, and they will never get this one back. That's for sure. And just fully so. We cannot trust them not to continue to do what they've done for so many years. So this piece of land will never go back to Syria.
In Syria, like we said about Egypt, Egypt is in a different place certainly than they were at that time, and they are likely not a threat at this point. As you said, to be a friend with Israel makes
Yes.
more sense to them.
Yes.
But Syria is still in such disarray, with their civil wars and such going on in the last.
There is now 5 different Syrias. You
Yeah.
don't even know who you're dealing with. Even though Assad's supposed to be in control, but he's not. Just today, yesterday, they blew up a bus with soldiers, and there is Iran and Turkey and Russia, and the whole world is in Syria.
Yeah,
It's unbelievable. So of course we have nobody to talk to or to trust.
yeah,
And in Egypt, even though the Muslim brothers took the reins after just before Sisi, and they were enemies of Israel. They were opposing. They killed Sadat because he did peace with Israel. Even they did not breach the peace agreement. They understood that it's not good for them.
yeah.
I mean, they took the control from Mubarak. I don't know if you remember that
Yeah,
name.
yeah.
So, and then Sisi threw them out.
What would you say? You still currently live in Israel, correct?
Say it again?
You still live in Israel, correct?
No, I live here.
Oh.
We moved here in '88.
What would you say is the biggest threat to Israel's security today? Because it seems like those wars of that era have the conflicts have not been the same in
No.
more recent years.
Yeah, we cannot go into a tank and do something as we did before. It's all different now. Well, there are two sides to this. Number one is the inside situation in Israel that is very, very bad because there is a huge conflict between right and left. The rightists want to keep all the area of the West Bank and to settle there and push the Palestinians away. And the left wing say we cannot do that. They live there for hundreds of years. And by being there, we are corrupting our own culture. And we send soldiers to chase children in the middle of the night. They're throwing stones, and we go into houses to look for weapons. And it really kills our tissues, our culture, our people are being poisoned by that. So this is one thing. The other thing is Iran, that is now looking to take over the area, and they support the Hezbollah, and the Hezbollah support Hamas, and they try to develop nuclear weapons, and they are a very big threat. They are involved in everything. They are against Saudi, they are against Lebanon, they are they're trying to put arms in Syria,
What about
which
Turkey?
Israeli until now
Yeah,
making attacks all the time against the Iranian in Syria.
trying to keep Iraq from really building.
Iran,
Yeah.
Iran, not Iran.
No, but they're in Iraq trying to,
Right.
they've got their fingers in everything in the Middle
So,
East.
but I think that Israel will withstand all that. We know how to protect ourselves, and
I noticed Turkey. They were giving like anti-tank missiles and stuff like that to Hamas. Is Turkey a threat to Israel as well?
Yeah, Turkey is supporting Hamas too, no question about it. Um, we used to be very good friends with Turkey until '67, and basically even after that, until basically the Muslims took over. Because Turkey used to be a very non-religious country. They were Muslims, but many people were not religious, and it was very Western. But since like 15 years ago, I believe, the Muslim took over Turkey, the whole situation changed dramatically. And we're not having war with Turkey, but we have a lot of conflicts and differences. And they support Hamas and they support the Palestinians without looking at the whole picture. They are against Israel, period.
Do you think future war is bound, like any conflict that might happen is gonna happen soon?
I have a hard time understanding what
Oh,
you say. Can you take the mask
okay.
for a second and
Yeah.
talk to me?
Do you think that like something like conflict might happen soon, and like what kind of conflict might happen?
Yeah, I will not be surprised. We have skirmishes all the time. They are doing all kind of operations against us, and we attack. The, for now, the Iranians in Syria are a very big target. Every time they try to move something or to build something, we go and destroy it, even though it's in Syria. And the Syrians cannot do anything about it. They don't even try. But you never know. Well, the situation as far as war between nations is not as bad as it used to be, because we have peace with Jordan, we have peace with Egypt, we have warm relationship with Saudi now, under the surface, but we do have it. We just had the Abraham agreements with Bahrain and Abu Dhabi and Qatar. So politically, the situation for Israel is better. But you always have those extremists who can do something unpredictable. So I cannot tell you what might happen, but I think that Israeli situation is better than it was in '73 or in '80 or at that times.
Yeah, I would tend to think that most of those sort of classic wars of the Middle East are probably done, but these sort of uh, puppet puppet groups like Hezbollah and such are probably Hamas, are going to be the sort of little gnats in the face of Israel for quite some time.
Right.
Do you think, rather than talking about the possibility of wars coming up, what do you think of the possibility of finding some sort of lasting peace agreement in Israel between Israel and those types of groups are?
I tell you, if Hamas was not become so strong and capture the Gaza Strip from the Palestinian Authority, we were doing pretty well with the Palestinian Authority. But don't forget, Israeli also have their extremists. We have the rightists in Israel that do not want the final agreement. They want to perpetuate the situation as is.
Yeah.
And they have presence in the Knesset and in the government. So it's not that always Israel tries so hard to get peace. No, unfortunately not. But we were doing pretty good with the Palestinian Authority, even under Arafat and after he went with Abbas. But when Hamas took over the Gaza Strip, they are very, very extremist, and they don't want to talk to Israel. They don't want to agree to Israel's existence. They can only talk to you about Hudna, which means ceasefire for a certain amount of time, so that they can gain force and accumulate ammunition and stuff. Not because they want not want to fight. They are very militant. So, as far as Hamas is in power, or at least they have the same leaders, um, I don't see any way to resolve the conflict.
All right, any last questions before we wrap up? All right, well, I would certainly like to thank you for coming in and talking to us and
My pleasure.
sharing your insights as they prepare to head to Israel hopefully later this year. So, actually, technically next year, but this school year.